Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to tackle a topic that always seems to be making headlines, but
It'd be a little tough to grasp sometimes.
yeah, we're talking about the federal budget deficit, and we've got some interesting excerpts from Tex Cawley, right? We'll be using that to kind of break it all down. We really want to figure out, how do people actually feel about the deficit?
Yeah, what does it even mean?
And what does it mean for us? Why should we even care about this?
That's a big one, right?
So I guess before we get into all that, maybe we should start with the basics. What exactly is the federal budget deficit?
So basically, it's when the government ends up spending more money than it's taking in through taxes and other revenue.
So kind of like...
It's kind of like when you overspend on your credit card.
Yeah.
You end up with a balance, and you have to pay that back, plus interest.
Gotcha. So the government's racking up a bill. Interesting. Well, speaking of bills, our source here, it says that 53% of Americans see this whole deficit thing as a major problem, which is a majority, but it's not like everybody's freaking out,
Right.
Does that surprise you at all?
It's kind of interesting, right? I mean, you'd think something with this much potential impact,
Yeah.
You'd think more people would be worried about it. But it goes to show that public opinion, it isn't always so clear cut.
For sure. And when you dig into those opinions, it gets even more interesting. So our source says that 71% of Republicans see the deficit as a very serious problem.
Right.
Compared to just 35% of Democrats.
Yeah.
So that's a huge gap.
Right.
What do you think is causing that?
Well, think back to, say, the Reagan years. Tax cuts were the big thing then. And yeah, they kind of contributed to the deficit, but there was also a big economic boom happening at the same time. So maybe for some folks that cemented the idea that deficits, maybe they're not always so bad.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, Democrats often push for things like social programs and, government-led stuff, which can mean more spending.
Right.
So maybe it comes down to different views on the role of government.
Makes sense to me. And it's not just about political beliefs, right? Because our source also mentions that during the Trump years, opinions on the deficit were actually more similar across party lines.
Interesting.
Remember the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act back in 2017?
Yeah.
That actually increased the deficit by a lot. But it didn't cause the same kind of partisan freak out as we see when a Democrat's in office.
Yeah, that's true.
So it seems like who's in charge definitely affects how people view this. But okay, let's get to the heart of it. Why should our listeners care about this at all?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Right.
Well, imagine this. Your city needs to fix roads, right? They're all messed up.
Yeah.
But there's no money for it because a huge chunk of the budget is going towards paying off debt.
Ooh, that's a problem.
Right. Or think about interest rates, on loans and mortgages. Those could skyrocket if the national debt keeps growing.
So this isn't just some far-off economic theory.
No.
This deficit could actually affect people's wallets.
Absolutely.
And if things really go south, could we even see cuts to things like education and healthcare?
Exactly. That's why, understanding this whole deficit thing, all the arguments around it, that's super important.
Yeah.
It helps you, be a more informed voter and have those real conversations about the future of, everything.
Right. It's like being, what's the word?
Financially literate.
Financially literate, but on a national scale. So we talked about how a big deficit can lead to a bigger national debt.
Yeah.
But some people argue that deficit spending, it can actually be a good thing, especially during, a crisis. So how do we make sense of these opposing views?
Yeah, you're right. There is another side to this. Think back to the pandemic. The government pumped trillions of dollars into the economy.
Right. Yeah. To try to keep things afloat.
Exactly. And a lot of economists would say that without that deficit spending, the economic fallout would have been way worse.
So it's about finding the right balance, right?
Yeah.
Knowing when deficit spending might be necessary versus when it becomes a real problem.
Absolutely. It's complicated. There are no easy answers. There are a bunch of different economic philosophies out there.
Right.
Each one has its own set of solutions, but they all come with trade-offs.
Well, this is a lot to process.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember from all this?
I think the biggest thing is that, this deficit, it's not just some abstract number.
Yeah.
This stuff has real-world consequences that affect you, your family,
right.
Everyone. Understanding those different viewpoints, the risks, the potential solutions, it's all essential if we want to navigate, the economic and political landscape.
Totally agree. Okay, so we covered a lot today, folks. How people view the deficit, the partisan divides,
Yeah.
and the potential impact of all this. But here's a final thought for you to chew on. As this debate rages on, how will it shape the future of our economy? How will it shape the policies that affect your everyday life? Keep those questions in mind as you stay informed and engaged. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.